Prologue. The room was dimly lit, thunder crackling from outside. The rain oozed down the window, the silhouettes of the droplets writhing down Miss Karen's shadowed form. She leaned back in her chair, facing the wall to Michael's left, and carefully reading over the book she had given him last Saturday, examining what he had filled in for each question. Michael waited nervously, tapping his knees. After a while, Miss Karen placed the green book on her lap and turned to Michael. "How often do you see these monsters, Michael?" Michael gulped. "Every night? Every day? Nightmares are only bad dreams. They can't hurt you." Michael shook his head. "But I don't just see them when I'm asleep. I also see them when I'm wide awake." Miss Karen stared for a moment. "Where?" "Daddy's place." Miss Karen looked confused. "Where's that?" She paused, looking thoughtful. "Wait, that place?" She widened her eyes, then looked back at the book, probably going over the pictures Michael thought were reasonable representations of the monsters he was seeing. Then, she looked back up at him. "Those aren't real, Michael. They're just animatronics." Michael's eyes widened. What? "Just robots. They can't hurt you. They're not even alive." Michael shivered, his voice squeaking. "They look pretty real to me." Miss Karen shook her head. "They're not. They can't hurt you." Michael startled when he heard a knock, then whipped around in his chair as the white door swung open. He ran. "Daddy!" Michael hugged him tight, and Daddy knelt down to hug him back. After a moment, Daddy straightened. "Is everything going okay?" Miss Karen looked at her watch, then back at Daddy. "May I speak to you for a minute?" Daddy nodded. "Yes." Michael clenched Daddy's hand, his hand barely fitting in Daddy's palm. Daddy looked down at Michael. "I'll only be a moment, Michael." Michael nodded, his voice shaky. "Okay." Michael walked outside the room and sat down on a bench in the hallway. Before the door fully closed, he heard Miss Karen say, "I have some concerns." After what felt like an eternity of waiting anxiously for Daddy, he walked out and took Michael's hand. Daddy and Michael rushed through the nearly empty parking lot. It was big, surrounded by trees and bushes that rustled in the howling, icy wind that splashed misty rain into their faces. After a short moment, they reached Daddy's car. Michael shivered in his seat as Daddy started the engine. Michael asked, "What was she concerned about?" Daddy adjusted the mirror. "Everything's okay." "You're sure?" "Yes, everything's fine." Michael looked down on his lap. "Okay." The house stood high above the trees, smoke bubbling from the chimney, light spilling out of the windows. Outside was a well and a shed where Daddy worked while he was home. He usually didn't spend much of his free time with Michael. Daddy walked Michael inside, but Michael walked himself to his room. In the hallway leading to his room, and Elizabeth's, stood a grandfather clock with a golden teddy bear atop it. Michael watched it as he walked by, certain that its eyes were following him. In Michael's room was a small bed with a matching golden teddy bear, whose eyes also appeared to be following him. There was a small nightstand and closet. The whole room was in bright neon colors. In the far corner were Michael's favorite stuffed animals, modeled after robots Daddy hadn't finished yet. There was a yellow chicken, a purple bunny, a brown bear, and a red fox. Michael squinted his eyes at the fox, realizing his head was missing. Just then, Michael heard a voice from behind him. "Roar!" Michael whipped around to see one of the monsters emerging from under his bed. He screamed and curled into a fetal position, sobbing. Then he heard laughing. He opened one eye and saw Thomas, his older brother, taking the mask off of his face. He soon realized the mask was actually the head to his oversized stuffed animal. He closed his eye again and continued to weep, soaking his hands with his tears. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Elizabeth, his twin sister, running in from the doorway. As she was half Thomas's size, her punch had no effect on him. "Don't scare him!" Thomas only laughed harder as Elizabeth dashed to Michael. He shook his head. "You're such babies. Grow up." He threw the head on the floor and strolled out of the room. Elizabeth knelt down and stared at Michael. "Are you okay?" Michael sat up and hugged her tightly. She hugged back. That night, Michael laid awake in bed. He was waiting for Elizabeth when he heard a click. He jumped up and scrambled to the door. The knob only rattled with every effort to turn it. It was locked. Michael banged on the door. "Let me out!" He heard Thomas's muffled voice. "Grow up!" There were loud footsteps before he heard Elizabeth's voice. "He's terrified. It's not funny. You're just a jerk." There was another bang and the entire door vibrated. Maybe Thomas had just shoved Elizabeth into the door. He shouted, "Grow up!" Michael heard footsteps fade into the distance as Elizabeth called, "Thomas! Thomas!" Michael sniffled, "I'm scared." Elizabeth spoke, "Don't worry, Michael. I'm here." Michael saw her poke her hand through the small crevice between the door and the blue carpet. Michael took it and squeezed tightly. Elizabeth said, "I'll be right here, Michael, okay? I promise, I'm not going anywhere." Keeping his grip on Elizabeth's hand, he laid down, wiping tears from his face. "Okay." He started crying. Elizabeth blurted, "It's okay, Michael." She tried telling him a story about rainbows and unicorns, but it didn't calm him. He cried himself to sleep. Michael shivered awake to a banging sound. He glanced at the floor and realized Elizabeth's hand was gone. He called, "Elizabeth!" He banged on the door. "Elizabeth, are you there?" He fumbled his hand through the small crevice between the door and the floor, sliding his hand from side to side, repeating, "Elizabeth, are you there?" Quaking at the thought that there would be no reply, Michael turned back around to face his bed, and then he saw it. Like a demon rising from the darkness of hell, it erupted from under his bed. Its eyes were coal black, its metallic flesh scratched and ripped, exposing gears and pistons, the fur ratted and shredded, its claws long and rigid. It opened its mouth, and Michael screamed as it grabbed him. His face plunged into an abyss crawling with long, serrated teeth. Chapter 1. Michael startled awake, frantically glancing at his surroundings to get his bearings. Quickly, he remembered where he was. He was buckled in his seat, resting in the back of Dad's car. Michael looked at Dad. "Sorry, I didn't sleep well last night." Dad, who was leaning around the back of his seat to look at Michael, smiled. "It's okay. I just wanted to tell you that we're here." Michael's face lit up as he glanced out the window, then back at Dad. "Thanks!" He unbuckled, then opened the car door. The arcade loomed above him, with wide glass windows on either side of the double-door entrance. and a rotating neon sign atop the roof. Behind Michael was a small parking lot, encircled by a mixture of trees and multicolored concrete structures. As Michael approached the front of the vehicle, Dad rolled down the window. "Have fun." He held up a finger. "And if you need me, call Freddy's. It's a work day for me. You remember my desk number, right?" Michael nodded. "Yes, I do." After hastily reciting the number, Michael smiled back widely. "I will have fun, thanks. You have fun too." Dad chuckled. "I will." He waved. "See ya." Michael waved back. "See ya." As Dad rolled up the window, Michael walked through the glass doors of the arcade. The interior was littered with rows of arcade machines, each game in their own unique neon design. Sitting on a white bench next to the entrance, Jenna jumped up with excitement, her brown hair swaying with emotion. "Michael!" Michael reached out his arms, and Jenna clasped him in a hug. They held tightly for a moment, then Jenna pulled back. "Happy birthday!" Michael nodded. "Thank you." Jenna asked, "How have you been?" Michael shrugged. "I've been great, actually. How have you been?" Jenna twirled her hair around her finger. "I've been great, too. How's school?" Michael chuckled. "Well, it's school." Jenna laughed. "Yeah, same here." Michael glanced at the rows of arcade machines beside them, some of which had a kid slamming them in frustration. Then, Michael turned his gaze back to Jenna's deep, greenish-blue eyes. "Well, which game you want to start with?" Jenna shrugged. "You're the birthday boy, you decide." Michael nodded with a chuckle. "Okay." He pointed to one of the machines. "That one." Jenna looked at it with a smile, then nodded at Michael. "Okay." Michael started toward the token machines, then stopped and turned to Jenna, who was closely following beside him. He asked, "How are we going to split the coins?" Jenna shrugged. "Does a birthday boy have to pay for his present? The games are your present, right?" Michael laughed. "I guess not, but I'd like to." He held up a finger. "Especially considering you're the present, not the games." Jenna smiled widely, slightly blushing. Then she shrugged again. "Okay, how about we each pay for our own tokens?" Michael shrugged with a smile. "Fair enough." It was Jenna's turn. Michael's ears were bombarded by the relentless clicking of Jenna's rapid fumbling with the joystick, as she tried hard to keep the falling pixelated objects from touching her avatar. Michael spoke. "You're doing good." Jenna giggled. "You did better." Michael shrugged. "You're not out yet." Just as Michael said it, an object lightly touched the top of Jenna's character, and with an 8-bit sound, red words popped up that read, "Game over." Jenna slowly turned her head, glaring at Michael. "You had to jinx me." They laughed. After catching his breath, Michael rested his arm against the arcade machine. "It's Fritz's birthday tomorrow, right?" Jenna smiled and nodded. "Yep." "He's gonna be 6, right?" Jenna turned her body to face Michael. "Yep." She sighed. "I remember when I was 6. Michael had a sudden memory of the nightmare. The coal-black eyes, the stripped metallic flesh, the long, serrated teeth, blood oozing down its claws. He blinked, then forced a smile. "Yeah, me too." Jenna's smile died. Judging by her not asking what was wrong, she knew Michael had just had a flashback to when he was 6. She smiled again. "I love him to death." Michael's smile became real. "Yeah, so do I. He's a great kid." Jenna nodded. "Thanks." Michael shrugged. "So, what are you gonna do for his birthday tomorrow?" He tilted his head. "After school, that is." Jenna laughed, leaning on the arcade machine. "Yeah, he's gotta do school on his birthday. Doesn't that just suck?" She shrugged. "I was gonna take him to..." She hesitated. His favorite place. Michael's hair stood on end. Cool. I hope you guys have fun. Jenna's smile died again. You don't mind, do you? She straightened. Leaving you out, I mean. Michael held up his hands. You're supposed to invite his friends, not yours. Jenna laughed. Fair enough. They laughed again before Michael spoke. Yeah, you just have to sit around, bored the whole time. Jenna raised the pitch of her voice in mock anger. Hey! I have fun with him and his friends too. She placed her wrist on the waist of her blue jeans, her fingers pointing away from her body. So what if he's half our age? They both laughed again, then heard a voice. Jenna! They turned to see Alice, Jenna's mother, standing near the entrance. She was wearing a floral, knee-length skirt and a green shirt that matched Jenna's. Alice took a few steps forward, sympathy on her face as she called, I'm sorry, but we have to leave early. Michael and Jenna looked back at each other. Jenna smiled and clasped her hands together, lacing her fingers. Well, I guess I gotta go. She glanced at the arcade machine, gesturing to it with her open hand. You can play some games while you wait for your dad. I won't get mad if you play without me. As she turned back, Michael glanced at his watch, chuckling. Thanks. He looked back up at her. But I got some time before my dad comes back. I was planning on going somewhere else later today, but it looks like I'll have enough time to go now. Where? Michael hesitated. Well, it's not just my birthday today. Jenna stared blankly, then smiled again. Okay. She held out her arms, inviting Michael into a hug. As they hugged tightly, Jenna spoke over Michael's shoulder. Bye. Michael spoke over Jenna's shoulder. Bye. They held each other for a moment longer. Then Jenna jogged to her mother, her shoes clicking loudly on the dark tile as she waved to Michael over her shoulder. Michael waved back. Jenna took her mother's hand. They all waved to each other. Then Michael watched as they exited the arcade. Outside, Michael took 3 steps away from the arcade before stopping dead in his tracks. He remembered, I didn't buy anything. Can I walk to the store and back before Dad comes back? He checked his watch again, thinking, probably not. When he looked up, he glanced around the buildings that surrounded the parking lot. A small toy store caught his eye. He thought, maybe there could be something in there? Michael walked to the edge of the sidewalk that surrounded the arcade. Between him and the store was a thin road that appeared to lead into the woods behind the arcade. Or maybe there was more city back there, concealed by the rustling trees. Michael looked both ways before carefully crossing the street, methodically checking for cars. When he got to the other side, he glanced into the wide, almost wall-sized windows of the store to make sure it was open, before walking inside. As Michael walked inside, the door closing behind him with a chime, he glanced around. Despite the concrete walls, the shelves were natural edge wood that glimmered in the yellow lights. The young woman, standing at the only cash register, tilted her head at Michael. Are you lost? Michael shook his head. No. Remembering stranger danger, he pointed back to the door. My dad's out there. He hoped his expression and tone of voice were good enough to fool the cashier. The cashier smiled. Oh, okay. She straightened. Is there anything in particular you're looking for? Michael smiled and shrugged. No, I just wanted to look around. Thanks. The woman nodded. Okay, feel free. Michael started toward the aisle on the far side of the store. Thanks again. Michael strolled back and forth along the 6 small aisles, intently scanning each of the shelves and ignoring the infuriating background music. Eventually, he found a small glass container of rainbow glitter. He looked at the price tag on the shelf and saw that he could easily afford it. With a smile, he walked over to the cashier and placed the glitter on the yellowish-brown wooden desk with a loud clunk. Then, he pulled money out of his pocket and placed it beside the glitter. The cashier thanked him for his purchase as he left. It wasn't too far of a walk, only a few minutes. Michael came to a field, the grass waving in the howling wind. Other than the buildings sitting atop the hill in the far distance, and the asphalt of the parking lot behind Michael, the place had a vibe of peace and isolation. Michael walked across the field, the grass and rocky dirt crunching and thumping beneath his feet. He got down on his knees and sat on his ankles. He gave a fake smile as he pulled the glitter container from his pocket and held it up. "I got this for ya." He placed it on his lap. "I know how much you love this stuff." He briefly searched his pockets, then pulled out his second-to-last dollar bill and used it as a barrier between the glitter container and the small dirt mound. He wiped a tear from his eye. "You were the reason I made it through those years. I wanted to say thank you, and I love you. I promise I'll always love you." He sniffled. "I wish I could trade places with you." He sniffled again. "Happy birthday, Elizabeth." There, protruding from the pile of dirt, lined up with all the other headstones, stood the grave that read, Elizabeth Afton, 1973 to 1980. Michael checked his watch, speaking aloud to the headstone. "Dad'll be back at the arcade any minute now. I'd better go." He kissed his finger before stroking the engraved name, then stood and waved to the stone. "Goodbye." He turned around and headed back for the arcade, wiping his tears with the sleeve of his neon shirt. For